In dealing with infidelity, one of the core foundational truths about caring for those who have either been unfaithful or have been betrayed is the simple truth that there are always different nuances to different types of affairs. There's exit affairs, there are one-night stands, there's long-term affairs, and whatever type of indiscretion or infidelity that you're dealing with, I assure you there's going to be nuances to that situation that are different from other people's situation. That's why whenever you're trying to care for those who are in crisis, to hand out these kind of simple platitudes or overgeneralized statements really causes more pain and causes more confusion than it does help. Now, what's also important is that you understand while there are nuances to different types of affairs and while every situation is different, there are general universal truths that have to be applied. For example, you are going to have to practice full disclosure if you want your betrayed spouse to give you any chance at healing or to be able to forgive you or to be able to emotionally get to a place where they're open to recovery. Because if they can't get to full disclosure, I'm sorry, your recovery is going to be very, very challenged, almost impossible, to be honest. And so that's an example of a universal truth that has to be applied to every situation. Now, today I want to talk to you about something that has become extremely controversial. I've had lots of emails and messages on Twitter and YouTube comments about this, and so today I want to talk to you very briefly, very compassionately about how infidelity works in a midlife crisis. In a few minutes, I'll give you some perspectives to keep in mind if you're dealing with an affair that has happened during a midlife crisis. But most importantly, before we go to those points, let me tell you that I do believe in midlife crises. I went through more of a quarter life crises, if you will. Yes, that's a thing. I know it seems like a millennial thing, if you will, and that's not a disrespectful thing to a millennial, but there is such a thing as a quarter life crisis that comes in large part due to fear of life and uncertainty and confusion. And I did go through something like that. And I drive a midlife crisis. It's an old Jeep. It's really cool. I love it. It has a problem every month. True story. And that's more of my midlife crisis. And it's a whole lot cheaper than having another affair, I promise you. The midlife crisis is not a get-out-of-jail-free card. And unfortunately, I have heard many unfaithful spouses, male and female, say, well, my affair was during a midlife crisis, and so the midlife crisis is over, and I'm good, and so I really don't have to do any recovery work. I feel pretty good about where I'm at. And I have to tell you, that's a recipe for disaster. The reality is that even though you may have had an affair during a midlife crisis, you are still responsible for what that affair has done to your spouse, done to yourself, done to your life, and there's a few things that you absolutely have to keep in mind if you're going to heal or if you're going to help your betrayed spouse heal. Number one, even if you had an affair during a midlife crisis, you still are going to have to be accountable to helping your betrayed spouse heal. Whether it was an exit affair or whether there's a child from the affair partner in some situations, or it was a one-night stand during a traveling trip for your business, or all the different types of affairs, the reality is that you're still responsible, if you want to save your relationship, for helping your spouse heal. Saying it was a midlife crisis or saying, well, I had an affair during a midlife crisis, so we can just get on and move on down the road, I'm sorry, does not take into account the fact that you have still shattered your spouse or your partner. You have, in so many ways, ripped the foundation of their life apart because you are or were a part of their foundation. So to think that you can relegate your choice that has devastated them as a merely stated midlife crisis and think that that's going to diffuse the impact of your choices, I'm sorry, it's just not accurate. Number two, though it may have been a different type of an affair, I promise you, and I just appeal to you to understand that this is going to be in need of a process-oriented approach. Even if it was a midlife crisis, which is so rooted in disorientation and confusion at life and unmet expectations and regret. And there's so much that goes into a midlife crisis, but I still need you to know you're going to have to take a process-oriented approach to your own healing as well as to your spouse's. This doesn't mean that just because it was a midlife crisis affair that you aren't going to have to go through the many steps that you're going to have to take to heal yourself, to heal your marriage, and maybe even heal your family. Number 3, and probably one of the most controversial points, is that many who have had an affair during a midlife crisis will refute the relapse data. And they will say, look, I'll never do this again. It was just because I was in the middle of a midlife crisis. I've fixed all that now, and we're going to move on down the road. It'll never happen again. I'm sorry, the data completely disagrees with you. The data says that for over 90% of those that have an affair, unless they get expert help, they do it again. I don't mean that to scare you, and I don't want to use that against you, and I'm not trying to undercut you with those stats, but I know that from personal experience, and there's thousands of unfaithful spouses, male and female, that would attest to the fact that they didn't get the right help and they had another affair, or they went back to their affair partner, or they had relaptic types of things that they gave themselves to until they got the right kind of help. The truth is, if you've been unfaithful and it was during a midlife crisis, you actually have a lot of work to do, because you have to work through the unmet expectations of life and the midlife crisis that you're dealing with regret and uncertainty and kind of some delirium that comes in at life, and life not going the way you wanted it to go, and all the different crises that we go through as just a man or a woman. So there's a lot of work there, but then we have to find out, well, how did that tie into me having an affair? To kind of say, I just had an affair because I was in a midlife crisis, any good therapist is going to probably say to you, well, you know what? We've got to find out, why did you have the midlife crisis, as well as why did you have the affair? Because there's a lot of work to be done for your midlife crisis as well as work for your affair. I get in lots of discussions where I have to help unfaithful spouses understand that you just can't flip the switch. It's unrealistic. To go from this big, monumental midlife crisis to, I'm good now, in the span of a few months, I'm sorry, some people say a few weeks, or even maybe 6 to 12 months, to think that you flip that switch and say, I'm good now, it's never going to happen again. It's just unbelievable. It's just not true, and it's really, there's no data to support that. And I'm sorry, one of the best things that you could do is to not take that approach and say, yeah, it's been a midlife crisis. I'm really trying to find clarity for my life, and I'm really wanting and willing to do everything I can to find clarity as to why I had the affair. Finally, and as I think about it, it's probably the most controversial point, is that some spouses, and certainly not all, and if you're a betrayed spouse watching this, I really don't want to imply that your spouse is doing this, but I'm just going to throw it out there because it has to be said. Lots of unfaithful spouses will throw out it was just a midlife crisis affair as another means of justifying or excusing or minimizing what they've done. I've seen articles that describe affairs in several different ways, the hookup, and all these different things. And an unfaithful spouse with a heart that's not dedicated to recovery and not dedicated to restoration and not dedicated to just getting healthy likes to use those statements as justifications, minimizations, and excuses. And lots of unfaithfuls, because I've been an unfaithful, I was there once too, I completely understand it. They're not wicked people. And just because they're using an excuse to justify their affair does not mean that they're wicked. It usually means that they're deceived or kind of ignorant or detached from what they've done. But I just want to appeal to you, if you're using the midlife crisis as kind of a get-out-of-jail-free card, or an excuse to minimize or justify the affair, your betrayed spouse is seeing through it. It's not working. One of the better things that you can do is to say, yes, I really believe it was a midlife crisis, and I really want to get healthy, and I really want to reevaluate my life and find health and find healing and find new purpose and new energy and new direction for the rest of my life. But I also want to find out, why did I have the affair? How can I make sure this never happens again? How can I make sure that the struggles that I had with my identity and my purpose in no way create vulnerability for me to ever have an affair again?